German pilots called it a flying milk bottle, too fat, too heavy, too slow. They laughed and made jokes in their ready rooms. Then one day, they attacked from above. The American pilot pushed his nose down and dove. 450 miles per hour, 480 miles per hour, 500 miles per hour. The German tried to follow. His wings folded off at 485 miles per hour. Nobody laughed after that. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. May 4, 1943, 23,000 feet above the Dutch coast, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler lined up his shot. The American fighter ahead looked like someone had strapped wings to a water tank. He'd heard the jokes in the ready room. His squadron mates called them jugs, fat, ugly milk bottles pretending to be fighters. Stigler pressed his trigger. His cannons roared. Shells hit the American plane's wing. Direct hits. The P-47 should have exploded. Instead, it rolled over and dove straight down. Stigler smiled. The American was running. He pushed his stick forward and followed. His Messerschmitt Bf 109 screamed into the dive. The needle on his airspeed indicator climbed fast. 350 miles per hour, 400 miles per hour, 450 miles per hour. Then something impossible happened. The American plane was pulling away. Getting smaller. Disappearing into the distance like Stigler was standing still. He glanced at his airspeed. 480 miles per hour. His fighter was shaking violently. The controls were getting stiff. Any faster and his wings would rip off. He had to pull back. The P-47 kept diving. 500 miles per hour, 520 mph, maybe more. It vanished into the clouds below like it was built for exactly this. Because it was. When the first photos of the P-47 Thunderbolt reached German intelligence officers, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Major Hans Philipp commanded Jagdgeschwader 1, one of the Luftwaffe's best fighter units. He had shot down 206 Allied aircraft. He knew what a fighter should look like. Light. Fast. Agile. The P-47 was none of these things. "Look at this monster," Philipp told his pilots, holding up the reconnaissance photo. "It weighs 13,000 pounds fully loaded. Our Bf 109 weighs 6,000 pounds. How does this thing even fly?" The measurements seemed wrong. The fuselage was huge. The engine cowling looked like a barrel. The whole aircraft was twice the size of a Spitfire. German pilots started making jokes immediately. They called it the flying bathtub. The 7-ton milk bottle. The American freight train with wings. One pilot joked, "The Americans are so rich, they're using fighters to deliver milk." Everyone laughed. Nobody was laughing 6 months later. The first P-47s arrived in England in January 1943 with the 56th Fighter Group. When Captain Walker Mahurin saw his assigned aircraft, his heart sank. "I'd been training in Spitfires," Mahurin remembered later. "Those were sports cars. Beautiful, responsive." Then they showed me the P-47. It looked like a dump truck. The cockpit sat so high off the ground, pilots needed a ladder to climb in. When you started the engine, the entire airfield shook. The 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine was the loudest thing anyone had ever heard. The engine alone weighed 2,300 pounds. That's as much as an entire Spitfire engine, propeller, and fuel system combined. British pilots who saw the P-47 shook their heads. "You Americans really don't know how to build fighters, do you?" one RAF pilot said. Even the Americans flying them weren't sure. The P-47 felt heavy. It turned slowly at low altitude. It took forever to climb. Everything the fighter pilots had learned about air combat said this plane was wrong. But there was one man who knew exactly what he was building. Alexander Kartveli was a Georgian immigrant who designed the P-47 for Republic Aviation. He didn't care what it looked like. He didn't care if pilots thought it was too heavy. He had done the math. The war in Europe was being fought at 25,000 feet. American bombers flew at 30,000 feet. Any fighter escorting them had to fight at those altitudes. At 25,000 feet, the air is thin. Normal engines lose power. Most fighters struggled up there. They gasped for air like runners on a mountain. Kartveli designed the P-47 to own the high-altitude sky. First, he needed the most powerful engine available. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 produced 2,000 horsepower. Later versions made 2,300 horsepower. The final models hit 2,800 horsepower. No other mass-produced fighter engine came close. But a powerful engine wasn't enough. At high altitude, even the best engine loses power. Kartveli needed something special. He added a turbo supercharger. This was a complex system that used exhaust gases to spin a turbine at 20,000 revolutions per minute. The turbine compressed intake air, maintaining sea-level pressure even at 30,000 feet. German designers had tried to build turbo superchargers. They couldn't mass-produce them. The tolerances were too tight. The materials too exotic. They gave up. General Electric in America was building 50 turbo superchargers every single day. With this system, the P-47's engine at 25,000 feet had more power than a German Bf-109 had at sea level. At 30,000 feet, the P-47 was in its element. German fighters could barely function up there. But Kartveli knew something else. Something the Germans would learn the hard way. In combat, mass equals survival. Kartveli made the P-47 heavy on purpose. Every pound served a function. The engine, 2,300 pounds. The turbo supercharger system, 500 pounds. 8.50 caliber machine guns, 400 pounds ammunition, 3,400 rounds. 800 pounds armor plating, 850 pounds fuel, 1,200 pounds. Total weight empty, 7 tons. German fighters were built light to be agile. They used thin aluminum. Hollow wing spars. Minimal armor. The P-47 was built like a tank. The main wing spar was solid aluminum, 300 pounds of metal that could withstand 20 G forces. The armor plating protected the pilot from every angle. The fuel tanks were self-sealing, bullets couldn't ignite them. And there was another benefit to all that weight. Physics. In a dive, a heavier object falls faster. More mass equals more speed. The P-47 weighed twice what German fighters weighed. In a vertical dive from high altitude, the P-47 became a meteor. The Germans were about to learn this lesson in the worst way possible. Hauptmann Johannes Steinhoff led his squadron over northern France on April 15, 1943. Below him, he spotted American bombers. And above the bombers, for the first time, he saw P-47s. They were enormous, Steinhoff wrote in his diary that night. We could see them from miles away. They flew in straight lines like bombers themselves. No evasive action. No tactical moves. We thought they would be easy prey. Steinhoff gave the order. His squadron of Bf-109s dove from 25,000 feet. This was standard Luftwaffe tactic. Build speed in the dive. Slash through the enemy formation. Zoom climb back to altitude. It had worked for 4 years against every Allied fighter. The German fighters screamed down at the P-47s at 450 miles per hour. The P-47 pilots saw them coming. They simply pushed their noses down and dove. Steinhoff watched in confusion. The Americans were running. Good. He'd chase them down. But they weren't slowing down. They were accelerating. Steinhoff's airspeed hit 460 miles per hour. His plane started shaking. 470 miles per hour. The controls were getting heavy. 480 miles per hour. His Bf-109 felt like it would shake apart. The P-47s were still pulling away. Impossible, Steinhoff said into his radio. They must be doing 520, maybe 540 miles per hour. How? He had to pull out of the dive. Any more speed and his wings would fold. He watched the American fighters disappear into the distance. Back at base, Steinhoff's mechanics didn't believe him. No fighter could dive that fast. The pilot must have been mistaken. But the same reports started coming in from other units. Other pilots. The heavy American fighters could dive faster than anything in the Luftwaffe. The joke stopped being funny. Test pilot Lowry Brabham had been diving P-47s from extreme altitudes during development. Republic Aviation needed to know the limits. Brabham took a P-47 to 40,000 feet. He rolled inverted and pulled the stick back. Straight down. The airspeed needle climbed. 400 miles per hour, 500 miles per hour, 550 miles per hour. At 600 miles per hour, the plane started buffeting. Compressibility effects were starting, the plane was approaching the speed of sound. The controls locked up. The plane shook violently. But it held together. Brabham deployed dive recovery flaps and pulled back on the stick. 7 Gs, 8 Gs. The G-force crushed him into his seat. Gray spots appeared in his vision. The P-47 pulled out of the dive. Nothing broke. Nothing failed. German fighters had structural limits. The Bf-109 could handle maybe 7 Gs before wings started cracking. Above 500 miles per hour in a dive, the controls became useless. The P-47 was tested to 9 Gs. Its heavy construction and reinforced control surfaces could handle speeds German fighters couldn't dream of. Every P-47 pilot learned this in training. If a German attacks from above, don't try to turn. Don't try to climb. Just push the nose down and dive. No German fighter could follow. In early 1943, 500 miles per hour seemed impossible for a fighter aircraft. Wind tunnel tests showed that above 500 miles per hour, aircraft entered the transonic region where airflow became unpredictable. Controls stopped working. Wings could rip off. German engineers had calculated their limits carefully. The Bf-109 had a never-exceed speed of 460 miles per hour in a dive. Beyond that, the thin wings would fold. The FW-190 could maybe reach 480 miles per hour before structural failure. Both designs prioritized light weight for maneuverability. This meant thin metal. Hollow spars, minimal bracing, perfect for dog fighting at 15,000 feet, deadly limitations at high speed. The P-47 was different from the beginning. Republic Aviation's engineers reinforced everything. The wing spar was solid aluminum, not hollow. It weighed 300 pounds by itself, more than some entire German wing assemblies. But it could handle forces that would snap a Bf-109's wing like a twig. The control surfaces had extra bracing. The tail section was massively overbuilt. Even the skin panels were thicker gauge aluminum. All this added weight. German designers would have rejected it immediately. Too heavy, too slow, too inefficient. But at 500 miles per hour in a dive, too heavy became still alive. Lieutenant James Goodson of the 4th Fighter Group experienced this on August 19, 1943. A German fighter attacked from above over Belgium. Goodson pushed the stick forward. "I watched the airspeed indicator climb," Goodson said. 480 miles per hour. The plane was rock steady. 500 miles per hour. Still solid. 520 miles per hour. I could still control it. The German behind me had disappeared. Later I learned he'd pulled out at 470 miles per hour. His wingman who tried to follow me crashed. His wings came off at 490 miles per hour. German pilots started reporting this consistently. The American fighters could dive to speeds that killed Luftwaffe pilots who tried to follow. Hauptmann Walter Dahl wrote in his combat report, engaged P-47s at 22,000 feet. Fired on one, saw hits. Target dove vertically. I followed to 480 miles per hour. Aircraft shaking violently. Had to pull out, American continued dive, estimated 530 to 550 miles per hour. This speed should be impossible. Request technical analysis. The technical analysis came back, it wasn't impossible. It was physics. The P-47 weighed 13,000 pounds loaded. A Bf-109 weighed 6,800 pounds. In a dive, the heavier aircraft accelerates faster. Terminal velocity, the maximum speed achieved in a vertical dive, is proportional to the square root of weight divided by drag. The P-47 had twice the weight. Yes, it had more drag from its larger size. But the math still favored it heavily. In a vertical dive from 25,000 feet, a Bf-109 would reach maybe 480 miles per hour before control issues forced the pilot to pull out. A P-47 would hit 520 to 550 miles per hour and still be controllable. That 50 to 70 miles per hour difference was the gap between life and death. Captain Walker Mahurin described a dive in September 1943, a 109 jumped me from above. Classic attack. I saw him coming and just pushed over. Full power dive. I watched my airspeed. 500 miles per hour. Still accelerating. 510, 520. The controls were heavy but they worked. I pulled out at 8,000 feet. Looked back. The German was gone. Either he'd pulled out much higher, or he tried to follow and his plane came apart. I never knew which. The Luftwaffe's technical branch tried to solve the problem. They tested strengthening the Bf-109's wings. It added 200 pounds. The fighter lost climb rate and maneuverability. And it still couldn't safely dive past 490 miles per hour. They tried with the FW-190. Better results. The radial engine design was inherently stronger. With modifications, they got some FW-190s to 500 miles per hour in test dives. But in combat, with battle damage and worn components, pilots still reported control problems above 480 miles per hour. Meanwhile, P-47 pilots were routinely hitting 520 miles per hour and pulling out without problems. The dive speed advantage changed tactics completely. P-47 squadrons were ordered, never dog fight at low altitude. Stay high. Use your altitude advantage. When Germans attack, dive. They cannot follow past 500 miles per hour. This is your escape route. Use it. It worked. By late 1943, P-47 losses in air combat dropped dramatically. German pilots were frustrated. They could attack, but they couldn't finish the kill. The Americans would simply dive away at speeds the Luftwaffe couldn't match. The Luftwaffe documented several cases of pilots who tried to follow P-47s through the 500 miles per hour barrier. The results were tragic. On September 12, 1943, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Weber was flying his Bf-109 over France. He intercepted a lone P-47 at 24,000 feet. Weber was an experienced pilot with 23 kills. He knew his aircraft. He opened fire. Hits on the American's wing. The P-47 rolled and dove straight down. Weber followed immediately. This was his kill. He wasn't going to let it escape. His wingman, Unteroffizier Hans Schmidt, watched from above. He saw Weber's Bf Bf-109 accelerating in the dive. 450 miles per hour, 460 miles per hour, 470 miles per hour. The aircraft was shaking visibly. 480 miles per hour. Schmidt saw the wings bend upward. Then they folded back like paper. The Bf-109 disintegrated in midair. Weber never had a chance to bail out. The P-47 pulled out of its dive at 3,000 feet and flew home. The pilot probably never knew he'd killed a German without firing a shot. Schmidt reported the incident. The technical officers investigated. Their conclusion: pilot exceeded structural speed limits in pursuit. Wings failed at approximately 485 miles per hour. But the reports kept coming. October 8, 1943, FW-190 broke up at 492 miles per hour trying to follow a P-47. November 3, 1943, Bf-109 lost both wings at 478 miles per hour in dive after P-47. December 15, 1943, FW-190 went into uncontrollable spin at 495 miles per hour, crashed. The pattern was clear. German pilots would attack P-47s. The P-47s would dive. German pilots, frustrated and aggressive, would follow. And some would push their aircraft beyond the limits. Oberst Johannes Trottloff, a Luftwaffe fighter commander, issued a directive in January 1944, all pilots are ordered, do not pursue P-47 Thunderbolts in vertical dives beyond 450 miles per hour. Multiple aircraft have been lost to structural failure. The American fighters are built to withstand speeds our aircraft cannot match. Pursuit diving is forbidden. But in the heat of combat, with adrenaline pumping, some pilots still tried. Major Heinz Barr, an ace with 220 victories, nearly became a statistic. He chased a damaged P-47 in a dive in March 1944. His airspeed hit 485 miles per hour. The control stick froze. The aircraft began violent oscillations. Barr pulled the throttle back and deployed flaps, desperately trying to slow down. At 8,000 feet, he regained control. His aircraft had damage to the wing roots. Stress cracks everywhere. I was lucky, Barr said later. 5 more mph and my wings would have come off. The P-47 I was chasing was doing maybe 520 miles per hour. I watched him pull out smoothly at 2,000 feet and fly away. That's when I truly understood. They didn't build a fighter. They built a diving sledgehammer. The Americans knew about this advantage and exploited it ruthlessly. Training manuals were updated with specific dive tactics. P-47 Tactical Manual, Section 4, Escape Procedures. If attacked from above by enemy fighters. Push nose down, immediately maintain full power, accelerate to 500 plus mph, enemy cannot follow, safely pull out below 5,000 feet, zoom, climb back to altitude. It became so effective that German pilots started complaining they couldn't kill P-47s even when they had perfect position. Lieutenant Gustav Freilinghaus wrote in his diary, I had a P-47 perfectly lined up today. Good deflection shot. I fired. Hits on his fuselage. He should be dead. Instead, he pushed over into a vertical dive. I followed to 460 miles per hour. My plane was shaking like it would explode. He kept going. Just kept accelerating, gone. This happened 3 times this week. 3 perfect attacks. 3 escapes. How do you fight an enemy you cannot catch? The answer was, you don't. The P-47's ability to exceed 500 miles per hour in a dive wasn't just a performance number. It was a tactical game-changer that made the aircraft nearly impossible to kill from above. June 26, 1943. Lieutenant Robert Johnson was separated from his formation over France. A German FW-190 appeared behind him. The pilot was Oberleutnant Egon Mayer, an ace with 25 kills. Mayer opened fire. Cannon shells ripped into Johnson's P-47. The canopy shattered. Glass cut Johnson's face. Instrument panels exploded. Holes appeared everywhere. Johnson tried to bail out. The canopy was jammed. He was trapped. Mayer pulled alongside to inspect his kill. The American plane looked destroyed. Smoke poured from the engine. The tail had massive holes. The wings were shredded. But it was still flying. Mayer couldn't believe it. He moved back into position and fired again. More shells hit. More holes appeared. The P-47 kept flying. Mayer fired a third time. A fourth time. He emptied his ammunition into the American fighter. Still flying. Mayer pulled alongside one more time. He could see the American pilot slumped in the cockpit, bleeding. Mayer saluted and flew away. There was nothing more he could do. Johnson nursed the destroyed fighter across the English Channel. He landed at his base on one wheel. When he climbed out, his crew counted the damage. 252 holes, some the size of footballs. Cannon shells had blown through the fuselage. The tail section was barely attached. Half the instruments were destroyed. 3 weeks later, after repairs, that same P-47 flew combat missions again. The word spread through Luftwaffe squadrons. The American fighters were built like battleships. You could hit them dozens of times and they kept flying. By summer 1943, German pilots were learning another hard truth. The P-47 dominated at high altitude. Major Gunther Rall, a German ace with 275 victories, wrote in his report, "Below 5,000 meters, 16,000 feet, we can fight them. Above 6,000 meters, 20,000 feet, they are superior in every way." The turbo-supercharger made the difference. At 25,000 feet, a Bf-109's engine was producing maybe 60% of its sea-level power. The supercharger couldn't compress enough air. The engine choked. At 25,000 feet, the P-47's engine was producing 100% power. The turbo-supercharger was force-feeding it air. This meant the P-47 could climb faster at altitude. It could accelerate faster. It could even turn better up high, because it had power when German fighters were struggling. Captain Fred Christensen of the 56th Fighter Group discovered this on July 7, 1943. His squadron encountered German fighters over Holland. A Bf-109 attacked from above. Standard tactic. Christensen didn't dive away. He was at 24,000 feet, his P-47's sweet spot. He pulled back hard on the stick. 6 gs. The P-47 turned tight. The German pilot tried to follow. His engine couldn't maintain the turn. He stalled and fell away. Christensen rolled out behind him. 3-second burst from his 8.50 caliber machine guns. The Bf-109 exploded. At high altitude, Christensen said later, the jug could turn with anything. The Germans didn't have the power to keep up. German pilots also mocked the P-47's armament. 8 machine guns. No cannons. Machine guns are for shooting at infantry, one Luftwaffe pilot joked. We have 20 mm and 30 mm cannons for killing aircraft. But they didn't understand American industrial thinking. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun was reliable, accurate, and deadly. Each gun fired 13 rounds per second. 8 guns together fired 100 rounds per second. Each bullet was the size of a man's thumb. It traveled at 2,800 feet per second. When it hit an aircraft, it didn't just punch a hole. It tore metal apart. And the P-47 carried 3,400 rounds. That was 34 seconds of continuous fire. In combat, pilots fired in short bursts. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. That ammunition load was good for 15 to 20 separate attacks. German fighters carried ammunition for maybe 60 seconds total. Often less. Bf 109 pilots had to make every shot count. They had perhaps 120 cannon rounds. P-47 pilots could miss 20 times and still have plenty of ammunition left. Luftwaffe armorer Hans Rossbach examined a crashed P-47 in August 1943. He opened the ammunition bays and stared. "Our fighters carried 200 rounds total," he said. "This American plane had 3,400 rounds. They could miss most of their shots and still shoot us down. We couldn't afford to miss even once." Behind every P-47 in combat was an industrial system Germany couldn't match. Republic Aviation's factory in Farmingdale, New York, covered 67 acres under one roof. 7 assembly lines ran 24 hours a day. 3 shifts. The lines never stopped. By late 1943, a new P-47 rolled out the door every 63 minutes. Every single day, 20 P-47s were built. Every week, 140 P-47s. Every month, 600 P-47s. The Pratt & Whitney factory in Connecticut employed 40,000 workers building our 2,800 engines. They produced 60 engines per day. Each engine required 25,000 individual parts. Each part had to be perfect. The tolerances were incredibly tight. And yet, they built 60 engines every single day. The turbo supercharger factory in Massachusetts built 50 units daily. Each supercharger had 3,000 components. Each turbine blade was machined to tolerances of 1/10,000th of an inch. The turbine will had to withstand temperatures of 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit while spinning at 20,000 revolutions per minute. German engineers said it was impossible to mass-produce such precision components. General Electric was making 50 a day. Across all of Germany, all factories combined were producing perhaps 350 fighters per month. All types. Bf 109s, FW 190s, everything together. America was producing 2,000 fighters per month. P-47s, P-51s, P-38s combined. The mathematics of industrial war were brutal. In January 1944, the U.S. Army Air Force launched Operation Argument. They called it Big Week. For 6 straight days, 1,000 bomber raids hit German aircraft factories. Hundreds of P-47s flew escort. The Luftwaffe had to respond. Those factories were their lifeline. Every German fighter that could fly went up. It was a trap. The Americans weren't just trying to destroy factories. They were trying to destroy the Luftwaffe itself. At 30,000 feet, P-47s waited. When German fighters climbed to attack the bombers, the Thunderbolts dove. 500 miles per hour, 520 miles per hour, 550 miles per hour. The Germans couldn't escape. They couldn't climb away. The P-47s had altitude advantage. They couldn't dive away, the P-47s were faster. They couldn't outrun them in level flight, not at high altitude where the P-47's engine dominated. In 6 days, the Luftwaffe lost 355 pilots killed or captured. Not aircraft, pilots. Men with experience, men who took years to train. The Americans lost 28 P-47 pilots. The ratio was devastating. More than 12 to 1. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler survived Big Week. He wrote in his diary, "We are being slaughtered. The Americans have every advantage. Altitude, speed, firepower, numbers, all we can do is attack the bombers and hope the P-47s don't see us. But they always see us." By mid-1944, the P-47 units had perfected their tactics. Colonel Hubert Zemke commanded the 56th Fighter Group. He stopped trying to fly like Spitfire pilots. Instead, he used the P-47's strengths. Boom and zoom, Zemke called it. We set up at 30,000 feet. We wait. When we see Germans below, we dive. 500 miles per hour or more. We fire our 8 guns. Then we climb back to altitude where they can't follow. If a German gets on your tail, don't turn. Push the nose down and dive. No German fighter can follow a P-47 in a dive. None. The results were incredible. The 56th Fighter Group, flying only P-47s, became the highest-scoring American fighter group in Europe. 674.5 aerial victories confirmed. They lost 128 aircraft total. Only 28 of those were lost in air-to-air combat. The rest were flak, mechanical failure, or accidents. A 24-to-1 kill ratio in air combat. Individual pilots were achieving A status in weeks. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski scored 28 victories, all in P-47s. Major Robert Johnson scored 27 victories. Colonel Zemke scored 17.75 confirmed kills. These weren't propaganda numbers. Every kill was confirmed by gun camera footage, witness statements, and crashed German aircraft. Major Johannes Steinhoff commanded JG-77 in Italy in 1944. His diary entries show the growing desperation. May 15, 1944, we had 12 serviceable fighters this morning. The Americans launched 75 P-47s from a single airfield. We hoarded every cannon shell. They fired ammunition like it was unlimited. When our fighters were damaged, we spent days repairing them. When their P-47s were damaged, they just replaced them. June 3, 1944, lost 3 pilots today. Good men. Experienced. Their replacements arrived yesterday. One has 30 hours in fighters. The other has 20 hours. Against American pilots with 300 hours of training. It isn't a fight anymore. It's murder. July 22, 1944, the Americans don't just have better fighters. They have an industrial system we cannot match. Every week more P-47s arrive. Every week they fly deeper into Germany. Every week there are fewer of us. Oberst Joseph Priller, commanding JG-26, sent a report to Berlin in August 1944. The P-47 has achieved air superiority through numbers and capability. They attack from altitudes our fighters cannot reach. They pursue at speeds we cannot match. They absorb damage that destroys our aircraft. Most importantly, they appear in numbers we cannot counter. Where we can field 20 fighters, they launch 200. By late 1944, P-47s were being used for ground attack missions. The fighter-bomber variant could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs plus rockets. German troops called them Jabos, short for Jagdbomber. They feared them more than artillery. Unteroffizier Otto Carius, a German tank commander, described P-47 attacks. They came in so low you could see the pilots' faces. 8 machine guns firing, rockets, bombs. Trees didn't provide cover, they blew the trees apart. We tried moving at night. They dropped flares and hunted us in darkness. The P-47's heavy construction made it ideal for ground attack. It could fly through flak that destroyed other fighters. The armor protected the pilot. The engine could take multiple hits and keep running. In ground attack missions, P-47s fired 135 million rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. They launched 60,000 rockets. They dropped 132,000 tons of bombs. They destroyed 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars, 6,000 armored vehicles, and thousands of trucks. The German army's logistics system collapsed under this assault. Trains couldn't run in daylight. Trucks couldn't move. Supply lines broke down. And above it all, that sound. The sound German soldiers learned to fear. The roar of 18 cylinders at full power, the scream of a P-47 in a dive. By war's end, the statistics told the story. Total P-47s built, 15,677 P-47s lost to all causes, 3,499 P-47s lost in air-to-air combat, 824 loss rate, 5.2%. Despite flying 423,000 combat sorties, only 5% of P-47s were lost. And only 824 were shot down by enemy fighters. Against this, P-47s destroyed 11,874 enemy aircraft, both air and ground, 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars, 6,000 armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks. The mathematics were undeniable. For every P-47 lost in air combat, 14 German aircraft were destroyed. And America was building 15 new P-47s for every one lost. Germany lost 23,000 aircraft on the Western Front alone during the war. The P-47 and its pilots were responsible for nearly half those losses, either directly or indirectly. By autumn 1944, the jokes had stopped completely. When Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, visited a fighter unit in France, he asked the wing commander what he needed. The officer's response became legendary: "I need P-47s, Herr Reichsmarschall." Göring's face turned purple with rage. The officer was immediately transferred to the Eastern Front. But every pilot in that room knew he was right. Major Gunther Rall, who survived the war with 275 victories, was interviewed in the 1980s. He was asked about the best fighter of World War II. "People ask about the Spitfire, the Mustang, the FW-190, Rall said. But the P-47? We laughed at it in 1943. We called it fat, ugly, slow, a flying milk bottle." He paused. "That ugly jug shot down our best pilots. It destroyed our vehicles. It wrecked our supply lines. It bombed our airfields. It did everything. It survived everything. And there were thousands of them." By 1944, the sound of those Pratt & Whitney engines was the sound of Germany losing the war. The P-47 wasn't the most beautiful fighter. It wasn't the most agile. It wasn't the fastest in level flight. But it was the most effective. Alexander Kartveli had designed it for exactly one mission: dominate the high-altitude sky over Europe and bring American pilots home alive. Every design choice supported this. Massive engine for high-altitude power, turbo supercharger for thin air, heavy construction for survival, 8 guns for overwhelming firepower, huge ammunition load for sustained combat, armor everywhere for pilot protection. The weight that German pilots mocked became the weapon that killed them. In a dive from 30,000 feet, mass became deadly velocity. The size that seemed so wrong was actually perfect. Room for fuel, room for ammunition, room for armor. Room for the complex systems needed to fight at extreme altitude. And behind every P-47 was an industrial system Germany couldn't match. Assembly lines that never stopped, factories that built 20 fighters per day, training programs that produced 7,000 new pilots monthly. The Germans built beautiful fighters with skilled craftsmen in limited numbers. America built sledgehammers on assembly lines by the thousands. In early 1943, German pilots laughed at the P-47 Thunderbolt. It was too heavy, too ugly, too American. By late 1944, that laughter had turned to fear. The fat jug that couldn't possibly fly had crushed the Luftwaffe under the weight of American industrial might. In a dive, when that massive P-47 accelerated past 500 miles per hour, German fighters couldn't follow. They could only watch as the flying milk bottle disappeared into the distance, taking air superiority with it. The final score was written in mathematics. 15,677 built versus 3,499 lost, 423,000 sorties flown, 11,874 enemy aircraft destroyed, 14-1 kill ratio in air combat. The Germans had laughed at American engineering. They mocked the heavy, ugly fighter that defied everything they knew about aircraft design. Then it dove past 500 miles per hour. And they couldn't follow. In war, the last laugh belongs to whoever is still flying.